This is the first of a series of monthly Irish Unity webinars that Friends of Sinn Féin will be hosting, focused on learning to help everyone get a better understanding of this historic moment we're in and a clearer sense of the role we can all play. We have been hosting events all across the country for almost a year now, and not only are the events well attended and excellent engagement, but at the end, there's always a desire to learn more. And so this series is one way we're creating opportunities for more learning and engagement. There are so many factors and angles and perspectives on the current Irish Unity conversation, and hundreds and thousands of activists who've been working on this for decades, not to mention decades and centuries of history. It can feel overwhelming and challenging to try to catch up with all that. So we can't do that. That's not something we're able to do. We are able to once a month focus on one aspect and one element of the conversation. I'm not going to be speaking this much for the whole event. I just want to set the stage for everybody. We're not going to be able to get everyone caught up in a 1 hour a month call, but we are going to make progress and deepen understanding of key elements. So a brief introduction from myself. My name is Greg O'Loughlin. I serve as the Executive Director for Friends of Sinn Féin. I'm responsible for the newsletter and social media, events, activism, education. I first began working with Friends of Sinn Féin in 1997, back in the late 1900s, when I worked in Washington, D.C. with Rita O'Hare for nearly 7 years. After some time working in classrooms and teaching English in Nashville, Tennessee, I'm back at the work full time. I'm glad I got out of the way, but really, I'm really excited today to be able to spend some time with our guest, Glen Bradley. Glen, hopefully you have read his bio in the introduction before you joined the call. And I want Glen to have a chance to introduce himself and let us know a little bit about who he is and the work he does and why he's here on the call today. Glen, would you mind taking some time letting the folks on the call know who you are?
Surely. Thanks very much, Greg, and thanks to all in Friends of Sinn Féin USA for having me on. As you can see from my youthful appearance, I was born in 1967, which makes me the ripe old age of 58. But being born in 67, I was obviously not part of the Northern Ireland state that practiced discrimination and prejudice. So, but I was born on the cusp of that era of most recent violence, where a sizable section of society here in the North said, we have enough with trying to secure reform. We are going to try overthrow the state. And that's what it was. It was a revolutionary declaration to overthrow the state of Northern Ireland. But growing up where I did, I was born literally 150 meters from what you guys would know, what you guys who have visited Belfast would know to be the West Belfast Peace Line or War Wall, as I like to call it. And I was born into relative poverty. It was a 2 up, 2 down impoverished home, working class. We had no running hot water. We had no central heating. The toilet was a yard on the outside. And my mom had been a late teen pregnancy. She'd had me when she was 18 years of age. So I was sort of born on the Saturday and secreted home on the Monday to be given over to my granny and granda and raised by them. And I actually lived with them until I was 12, although obviously I saw my parents in between. But but that for me was wonderful because they had a very, very mature outlook on life. My granda was the age that I am now, and my granda and my granny were born pre-partition and could remember pre-partitioned Ireland. So their outlook was very, very mature. And my granda worked in the brickworks of Belfast. He worked in McGladdery, those that know Belfast. He worked in McGladdery Brickworks and Parkview Brickworks, which were in the West Belfast locale. And in there, he was heavily involved in the labour movement. So we would have, he would have been the shop steward of his shift. Trade unionism was very much a discussion point within our household. My other inheritance politically would have been that we were very proud of our Irishness, but our Irishness was very much in line with our Britishness in the sense that we, Irish, along with the English, the Welsh, and the Scots, made up the modern UK nation, i.e. the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, just as an American would see themselves as Hawaiian and US, or Puerto Rican would see themselves as Puerto Rican and US, or an Alaskan as Alaskan. We very much saw ourselves as Irish and British. So that was sort of my inheritance in life when I was born. Coming from a working class family, and despite the orgy of chaos and lawlessness and violence that was going on all around us, my grandparents and my parents were just trying to put bread on the table. It was just try get on with your life, try avoid the violence, try not get involved in it, and crack on. But sometimes you couldn't avoid the violence back then. And in 1972, when a boy of 5 years old, I was going over to my church, Woodvale Methodist, to go away on a Sunday school outing, when an IRA bomb, I got injured in a no warning IRA bomb. So very early on, I became a child victim of IRA violence. And I have to admit, growing up, that's all the IRA were to me. They were a murderous machine that was trying to kill me, was trying to kill my family, was trying to kill my community. Because back then, the motto was Brits out, and it was everywhere. I mean, it was absolutely everywhere. And while Republicans today will go to great lengths to explain what they meant by that back then they didn't actually provide any explanation. And as far as we were concerned, we were the British presence in Ireland. We were the loyal Irish. They were the rebel Irish. That's how I was raised to believe it. But if we fast forward to 1981, there was another incident that shaped me, and that was on the day that Bobby Sands had died on hunger strike. And as our school bus was passing an area called Ardoyne, it was petrol bombed. But for the bravery of the driver on that day, the casualties would have been far higher. There were 16 kids injured. But it's the first day I remember seething hatred, because I got off the bus and looking back up the road to the Ardoyne junction, I thought, I am going to kill you guys. I'm going to kill you. And motivated by that sense of outrage, that sense of injustice, I enlisted into the British Army in 1984. The British Army is one of 3 armies in the world that recruits children aged 16. Nowadays, you have to get your consent to join at 16, but back then I could join without my parents' consent. And that's what I did. And like any army, armies all over the world take people in, they break them down, they make them up, and I became an instrument of violence for the state. I served I served the Crown basically from 1984 until 1994 in various guises. But that saw me seeing service here in Northern Ireland. And during one of those tours in September 1990, I was working in a comm centre because I had become an infantry signaller. There was radio clatter came over about the IRA abduction of a police officer, an off-duty police officer. And as the security forces mounted an operation to rescue that police officer, it became apparent that the police officer was my uncle, Detective Constable Louis Robinson of the RUC. The IRA held him, they tortured him, they shot him 3 times in the head, they dumped his naked body on the border, booby-trapped it to kill soldiers like myself who were out looking for him. But it was one of the first times I remember having a wobble of consciousness about the futility of violence. Because here I was, or back then there I was, a proud Irishman, my uncle, a proud Irishman, who was butchered in a way that you wouldn't do to an animal by men who were professing to be Irishmen and trying to convince me and him that we would be welcome in their version of Ireland. And it just didn't compute. It still doesn't compute when I think about it. But then again, there were many things that didn't compute then, because over the noise of bomb and bullets and guns and armed actions, none of us could hear politics. But it was my first wobble, and 2 years later in Bosnia, when I was working there, I went full circle, and myself and what I was doing just didn't align no more. So I left and returned home to Belfast at the start of 1994. And I did 2 things. I formed my own company, and I got involved in politics. I joined the Ulster Unionist Party, where I quickly became the chair of the West Belfast Constituency Association. and the treasurer of the Ulster Unionist Council, which is one of the junior governing bodies of the party. So those two ranks of officership and got me involved in the talks that were led to the Good Friday Agreement, where our party, along with a great many others, some known, some unknown, founded the Good Friday Agreement, brilliantly chaired by Senator George Mitchell, with huge American support at that time. Then, as now, I stand by the Good Friday Agreement in all its entirety. My singular biggest regret is that it hasn't been permitted to be rolled out in full. At the same time, I was going through a lot of personal stuff. I had, at that time, I had undiagnosed PTSD. I was drinking too much. I'd become an alcoholic. I hadn't done recovery at that stage, and I was doing a lot of plate spinning, fledgling business, politics, getting involved with my children's lives, because my wife and I had separated, but she had cancer and it was terminal. So in the late 1999, I made the conscious decision to withdraw completely from public political life and focus on being a single dad and focus on building business and being an asset in business, and that's what I did, and I became very successful. I met my wife Jo in 2003. We wed in 2008. We've traveled the world together. My business has enabled me to do brilliant and wonderful things, but I always kept a philanthropic interest in what the area that I came from. So I would have done things like sponsoring football teams locally, kids football teams. I got involved in Interaction, which is an organic community group that was formed by a former loyalist and former Republican prisoners. And I even today, as I'm talking to you, I'm on the board of the Belfast Charitable Society, which is Belfast's oldest charity, going back to 1751, is associated with the families of the United Irishmen. Yeah. And for my sins, I had joined Veterans for Peace back in 1997. I was recently, in 2024, elected the chair of the Irish chapter of Veterans for Peace. And that, I guess, is many of the reasons of why I'm here talking to yourself today.
Well, that is quite a story, Glenn. I'm very grateful to you for sharing in such great detail that knowing the work and the question from the perspective of a 5-year-old going to school all the way to a soldier in Bosnia in '94, and thinking about that through line is quite a powerful tale. And I'm grateful to you for sharing it so openly. It has led me to a lot of questions, and I'm eager to dive in. I know also that you glossed over a little bit of the work you do in business, which is just as important and really vital to some human rights questions around the world. And I hope we have time to dig into that as well. It's really powerful work you do.
Yeah, no problem.
When I first met you, this was a few years ago. We were in the halls there of Cooper Union, down in Lower Manhattan, for the Irish Unity Summit, and it was a hectic time. Everyone has to be on stage at a certain minute and get off the stage another minute. So you and I didn't have a great deal of time to dig in and connect. But it spoke so much to me that you took the time, because it's not easy to hop on a plane and come to New York and go on stage in front of 800 people and share a stage with Mary Lou McDonald and with Brendan O'Leary and Sophie Colgan and Jack McGarry, and say, this is my story. That's terrible. It's a terrifying thing to do, to share and open up. And yet there you were doing exactly that. You took the time and said, yep, I'll take the flight. I'll stay in a hotel room. I'll be away from my family for a bit because this is important to me. What was it about, hearing your experience in the school bus on Bobby Sands' death, getting petrol bombed, that's enough to have anybody say, I'm just done, thank you. I want to go, and I want to, I don't know, become a data entry person and never think about that stuff again. But here you are saying, no, there's work for me to do. How do I help? What was it that made you say, yeah, I want to be a part of that?
Well, I think it's partly to do with the work that I've been involved in business and human rights, and trade unionism. And that has led me on a journey of my own, because the origin of modern Irish republicanism exists in the ideology and action of the United Irishmen, which was founded in 1791.
Yeah.
And that was obviously informed by enlightened radical Protestants who propagated reform back then, and in those days, non-Anglican and Catholic emancipation. Now, I'm Irish. I've never disputed my Irishness. I am a Protestant of a Methodist upbringing. And I'm a Republican in the sense that I don't agree with a hereditary elitist undemocratic king or queen who holds royal prerogative as a head of state. But I would be very different to those that hold dear the label of Irish Republican as their own. And in some cases, I might add, who would look down on those of us who are non-Gael. So for me, it felt essential that I had to go to Irish America to let you guys know that there are those of us back here in Ireland who are advocating for democratic accountability on our island, and that we just don't hail from that traditional, Catholic Irish Republican family, or what I'll call the most recent Republican movement. And I mean, I think, you briefly mentioned some names there like Jack, Sophie, and so on and so forth, but the panel on the day was made up of a cross section of Irish society that reflected modern Ireland. It was people of all faiths and none. It was people of color. It was people with diverse histories. Not just me, but the one thing that was uniting us was our desire for democratic accountability via self-determination on our island. And I believe that had to be demonstrated on the day by a panel of people that visually showed that, because a new Ireland should only be delivered by the people of this place, all those eligible to vote. It's not the sole preserve of Sinn Féin. It's not the sole preserve of that traditional, what I'll call that traditional Irish Republican family. And it will only be delivered by an alignment of left-leaning, socialist thinking reformers who want a new sovereign state, free of English establishment misadventure here, and where the government will work to deliver for all of our people in an equal and equitable way, improve well-being and quality of life. So for me, it was essential that Irish America understands that is what is required, and the hard work that must now start taking place to advance the referendum on unity, and that it can only be delivered by a broad base of support across Irish society, both here and in the north and in the south.
That is really insightful. I love this notion, expanding for Irish America, the very diverse ways someone can be Irish Republican, someone can be Irish, someone can be committed to the notion of, hey, self-determination is the priority. That can look a lot of ways and can come from a lot of different places. And until those connections between a lot of people who think that and feel that way and are committed to that can come together, and we're not going to be able to make the progress that we know not only can we make, but that's been promised and spelled out in black and white in the Good Friday Agreement. That's really helpful. And I know, based on my experience in following up with the feedback after that event and the time since, that you hit that note well. That was, even on this call here, an expansion of people's understanding of, well, my understanding of Irish republicanism comes from either working with NORAID, reading books, visiting Ireland over time. And it turns out there's a very broad application of this. And if we go all the way back to the founding of Irish republicanism, it's very clear, but that's still alive today. It's still a diverse space for people. And so as we see a lot of our work focused on trying to get folks to recognize this moment as a moment where we're not talking about Irish unity as an aspiration or as the lines and songs our grandfathers sung. It is work to be done, that we're turning that corner. That's a tough corner to turn. It would be enhanced by, and perhaps just as important, that we get Irish America to recognize the true diversity of Irish republicanism and the folks who want to be doing this work, working together arm in arm. So thanks for spelling that out so plainly and sharing your motivation on that one.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, for me, Greg, I mean, what stood out for me from the experience just as a bolt on was that, I'm being serious here, I went not knowing what to expect.
Yeah,
And I considered it, given my background, I considered it very risky. It was something unknown, but I actually didn't go to give with the intention of giving people stuff, if that makes sense. I
yeah,
went to learn and hopefully benefit from the engagement, because discussion is a tool for progress and understanding. Discussion isn't a contest of who is right. Discussion isn't a game of one-upmanship, but rather it's an exchange of knowledge that expands perspectives of
yeah,
everyone that's involved in it. So, I think, on the day, because I remember getting somebody's business card, and I remember laughing at it because it said Irish Catholic American. I was sort of going, Jesus, if I had, Protestant Irish, back home, I'd be
yeah,
prosecuted under the Fair Employment legislation. So, there was that assumption that everyone was there, I think, that was Irish and Catholic. And there was me, and I don't know if you remember, but my wife Jo was with me and
yeah,
at the event, and there was us in the middle of this horde, and we were something very different, but and I think that, well, I hope that one of the things that the people on the day took away from it, because I do think there is an element of Irish America that still holds that, romantic Darby O'Gill and the Little People, the
hmm,
quiet man notion of Ireland, whereas modern Ireland is not like that, as
no,
you well know.
yeah,
So, that's one factor. But the other factor that really surprised me about the event was the absolute willingness of strangers to me, to open their arms and make us feel welcome, and who were genuinely there to listen, not to lecture or point fingers or to adopt a moral high stance, but to educate and inform themselves. And I have to say, because obviously, given my background, I would be in Britain a lot. I would have
yeah,
traveled Britain a lot. I experienced something with the Irish American diaspora over that period of time that I have never seen
yeah.
existing in Britain. And it was, for me, I found that refreshingly non-toxic. I
Yeah.
really, really did.
A desire to learn and
Yeah.
expand an awareness. That is
Yeah.
that is great to hear. That was the goal of the event. I'm very happy to hear it landed at that level. The where I'd love to dig in a little bit. I just was taking notes as you were speaking. Was it you were in Bosnia? Was it? And that's when you kind of that changed context gave you a moment. I love the line there. You said it. We couldn't hear the politics over the noise of all the bombs and the guns, and separate from
Yeah.
that a bit and say, wait a second, there's work to be done. Would you consider that? Because as I wonder if there's not that moment isn't the same thing as I think United Ireland is better for all
No.
Irish people, myself and everybody else that I consider Irish, and everyone here doesn't consider themselves Irish. You can be British and live in Ireland. So where does it happen that you say to yourself, like, oh, I think the best path forward is actually going to be a united Ireland. Like, like at what point in your story does that transition happen, or does that penny drop, or does that kind of say, well, I want to learn more? Perhaps it isn't even just a fully formed thought. Maybe it's, well, I kind of want to consider this now.
I don't think there was one huge catalytic moment for me.
Yeah,
In the journey of my life, simply as I evolved, and as my worldview changed and I became more worldly wise, for want of an expression, I would have had grave concerns about the British state.
hmm,
I've already stated, I would be a Republican in the sense that I don't agree in a monarchy and things like that there. And those concerns would have always taken a back burner in an activist way, because I started work at 16 when I joined the army. I retired when I was 55. I worked continually for 39 years. I've paid into the British Exchequer all
Yeah.
those years. And there was always that why rock the boat type attitude to me, you know. So while I would have very much had been open-minded and would have classed myself a very small unionist to a certain point, what destroyed it all in me was Brexit. Brexit, Brexit enabled me to cross the Rubicon, so to speak, and confidently say, and this is my personal view, no, I'm done with Britain. I'm done with accepting more of less. I'm done with I'm just done with it, you know. And it was the moment that enabled me to say, you know, no, I'm just not playing with this with this no more. You know, and it hasn't. I don't want to say it's been a difficult decision, because it isn't. I mean, to me, it's as clear as black and white, you know, writing on a page, that, you know, my reasons for why I certainly would give up on it. But it's just that I no longer believe that, in the interest of my children, who are now adults themselves, but my grandchildren, that the British state will deliver best well-being and best quality of life. I don't believe that they have the interests of any person in Northern Ireland on their minds. And Brexit, for me, just cemented that, because as I mentioned when I give my brief bio, you know, I resolutely did believe that the United Kingdom was made up of four small nation partnerships, i.e. Northern Ireland, Scotland, England, and Wales. You know, I firmly believe that. I joined the army to fight for my then notion of nationhood, and so on and so forth. And Brexit utterly destroyed that, because even if all the people in Northern Ireland had voted against Brexit, and even if all the people in Scotland had voted against Brexit, the overwhelming numbers of the English electorate, you know, frothing on English nationalism, for want of a better description, would have carried the Brexit vote. You know, for me, whenever Scotland and Northern Ireland voted against Brexit, that was a draw. You know, Wales and England voted for, Scotland and Northern Ireland voted against. At that point, somebody should have been saying it's a draw, we need to rerun the referendum, or we need to do this, and and that maybe would have drawn out a little time where the charlatans and the deceits and the lies could have been of Brexit could have been exposed. And that didn't happen. And since it has happened, you know, there is just a toxic landscape in Britain that is still about Brexit. And for me, I just don't want no part of those shenanigans. I would rather work with my neighbour, whether that be my neighbour here in Belfast or my neighbour down in Cork, to achieve self-determination and build something that is better for ourselves, where it's our values that are important, and that it's our people that are important, and that's just how I see it.
So it wasn't necessarily then a business-based. Brexit's impact was more on the exposition of the undemocratic principles or undemocratic nature of British rule in Ireland. It subverts the people's will if in this, and that's too much. That is and the way you can talk about that as in the United Kingdom, this is how we handle managing the people's will and expressing it through democratic principles. But when it's so exposed, when it's so nakedly clear that the will of the people can easily be ignored in Scotland and in the North, so that's interesting. I've thought about Brexit's impact a lot as the way it hits kitchen tables, the way that really did do a lot of harm to small businesses and to families, to say, wait a second, why am I adhering to an ideology when that ideology is really harming me? That creates a crack for new thoughts and exploration. But that exposition of undemocratic principles is really fascinating, and I think an important piece. And I'm grateful to you for sharing that.
I mean, don't get me wrong, from 2016 through to 2022, when I retired in business
Yeah,
and as a supply chain guru,
yeah,
Brexit was the almost daily topic
yeah,
within, because I worked for a major manufacturer. We were obviously supply chain. We were importing the parts, making the manufactured product that we were then exporting. And there's one thing about supply chain. Transparency greatly reduces surprises.
yeah,
It's always about talk, communicate, share, collaborate, because everything's supply chain. It's about buy, make, move, fulfill. Bad communication and supply chain is kryptonite. That's
of
how we
course.
see it.
Yeah,
And Brexit was like a kryptonite hand grenade being
yep,
dropped into to business. And to be honest, it still is. Um, so it's very much that, yes, business and what I was experiencing in business was influencing my thoughts. There's
sure.
no doubt about that. And I'm on record in the Irish Times when I was working
Yep,
and being interviewed as a business leader about what I said at that time and so on. But for me, it is the domination of English nationalism and
yep,
English nationalistic ideals, and the undemocratic. I'm just trying to think of words here to describe
yeah,
it. Methods that became so glaringly obvious.
yep,
And I have grave concerns that Britain is on its way to being a kleptocracy. I
yeah,
really, really do. I really do.
yep. Council elections, and you can see that the rise of the far right.
Yeah.
The would you say that so you and your colleagues in the business world can recognize the harm of, like you say, a lack of transparency in a supply chain
Yeah.
degrades the quality and ability drastically. Amongst your colleagues or amongst folks you work with, was there a natural conversation then of does the topic of Irish unity even come up in that? If it does, is it natural? If it's is it something that you kind of say like, wait, here's a chance I could talk to a work colleague and see how they feel about this and kind of get a sense of where they are on that? Like, to what degree does that sort of conversation come up amongst work colleagues?
I don't, I have, obviously I'm a member of the Institute of Directors, was a member of the Institute of Directors in Ireland. I'm a member of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply and so on. I don't meet anyone in the profession that I was in the environment that I worked, and in the trade bodies that I was associated with, who does not see a singular Irish economy as beneficial for business here. I
Wow.
don't
Oh, is
know,
that
no.
prevalent? Yeah.
I worked in a very specific industry, quarrying and mineral and so on and so forth. But I have never met anyone. But keep in mind what this conversation is about, Greg, and what I said about, supply chain
Yeah.
doesn't like surprises. Business in general doesn't like unknowns. Supply chains like fluidity, and everything is a supply chain. I mean, supply chain is all around you.
Yeah.
So coming back to what we are actually debating and engaging in today, it is essential that business leaders and trade organizations, I'm all about things like the Institute of Directors, the Institute of Export, the Federation of Small Businesses, etc., etc. It is essential that they are engaged with, they're kept informed, and they are brought into the discussion, because whether we stay in this stale union or whether we move to referendum that will deliver a new Ireland, business will always adopt, improvise, and overcome, no matter
Yeah.
what environment it's working
Yeah.
in. But
Yeah.
it has to be informed.
Yeah.
And if business is unafraid of change, and in the event of a uh, um, Irish unity, then I think that will be a real key
Yeah. Lever. Yeah.
winner for
Yeah.
the process. It's, I mean, to me, it's not rocket science. If you can't describe what you're doing as a process, then you don't really know what you're doing. And
Yeah.
I think it's important that process of, leading up the referendum, what it is and the horizon post-referendum,
Yep.
clear, smart objectives, specific, measurable. We all work to these
Yep.
things on a daily basis. And I just think that needs to be, business needs to be kept informed.
Yeah. I very much agree. I think that's a key part of what progress will look like. And what I know it's a bigger question than just Sinn Féin's question, but it's part of Sinn Féin's
Yeah.
push for preparation for referendums, for citizens' assemblies, for conversations. And it's good to see, when universities put together these white papers and release and research, say, this is what we think the cost might be. These are some questions we still have. That's what this work looks like. We start to shine a flashlight into the corners and find
Yeah.
what's in there. To transition a little bit, I'm curious about how, because there's a logic model that I can see that would allow me to talk to a business colleague, a coworker, someone, and say, man, this lack of transparency makes our work harder. Wouldn't Irish Unity be a better way to go? A single economy here. Do those conversations feel as natural, or do you have similar conversations with family, with friends? Is it a topic of conversation, socially? To what degree is it discussed?
It depends on the friends and it depends on the family.
Yeah.
I think as Ireland's future have increased the civic debate, that absolutely there's more people coming to the debate, so to speak.
Yeah.
But there's a quote out there. You can silence 50 scholars with one fact, but you can't silence one idiot with 50 facts. And I think the debate at the moment is attracting a lot of idiots because the misinformation that is out there is unbelievable, and it's
Yeah.
coming from sources that I certainly would raise my eyebrow at. The
Mhm.
other thing that I'm noticing at the moment is, and this is just on a general scale,
Yeah.
is that when a debate sort of happens, and if that debate is lost, slander becomes the tool of the losers. And I'm thinking of my colleague in Ireland's future, Colin Harvey, and what he has gone through. And I know he's
Yeah.
going to be on this speaking as well. But solidarity to Colin for what he's been going through, for simply presenting the facts of
Facts. Yeah. Research. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
of what it is and what it is that he's doing. But as I said, it does depend upon the family and who they are and who the friends are. So yes, I have extended family who would despise my uh, desire for self-determination and would make it known to me. But I remind myself that, like me, come the day of referendum, and whether they like it or not, they have one vote, and that
Yeah.
democracy in this place cannot be continually denied.
Yeah.
And I think that's particularly true if we look at things like the census that show that there's only 31% of people here see themselves, and I'm talking about specifically in the north, see themselves as British. Or if we look at the recent elections, there's less than 43% voting for pro-union parties. Now, I'm not saying there's more voting for pro-unity parties. There's not. There's a huge swathe of
Yeah.
unknowns out there.
Yeah.
But I don't think there is any side in this debate can lay claim to holding yet that 50+1%
Yeah.
threshold for change. So yes, it is discussed, but again, because of the circumstances of the world and because of what we faced, it's discussed not as a primary topic. It's discussed in line with other things,
Sure.
and what I'm finding is it usually comes up when you're talking about cost of living,
Yeah. Yeah.
and people are looking at their cost of living more potently, for want of a
Yeah.
description,
Yeah.
in this steel union, and thinking, well, how can I improve my lot? And most people I know, I don't know about you guys over in the States, but most people I know wake up, look out the window, like to see the buses are running, like to see
Yeah.
everything's normal. The world hasn't gone on a tilt in its axis.
Yeah.
So the constitutional debate is not at the forefront of their minds. But over here in this place, it's always there, lurking in the background. So with the cost of living, I just think people have a priority at the minute about their housing costs, their utilities, their clothing, their food, etc., etc. However, these are the people whose vote is essential and who we must have coming on
Yeah.
board, to basically, understand what it is that they're doing. We must be capable of addressing their concerns,
Yeah.
because people will want to know the real cost in bread and butter terms. They will want to know, what, if I'm going to give up, this union where I'm assured, if you think of people and benefits, where I'm assured my PIP, where I'm assured this, I mean, what is it that's going to actually replace that? So I think this debate in the lead up to referendum is absolutely instrumental.
Yeah.
And it has to convey the actual facts of what it will be. Now, I'm not talking about every, T dotted and every I dotted and every T crossed, but the detail to the bread and butter issues that affect those people who are currently apathetic in voting patterns and don't vote, and or who are unknowns in this debate. It is essential that we get the nuts and bolts out there, and we let it be known. And I think I've used this example talking to you before, Greg, but again, keep in mind someone like me worked 39 years, paid into the British Exchequer. Although I'm a retiree, I'm living on money that I've saved until I'm 67, when my state pension will kick in. Now, I'm entitled to a full state pension under the British system because I worked for 35 years or more and paid into the system.
Yeah.
And in New Ireland, who is going to pay that?
Yep.
Now, it's nice to think Britain will do it. But if we look at areas where Britain has withdrawn, particularly India, and other areas where they have withdrawn from, it's like, adios, we're away, see yous, get on with it, and so there are real life issues out
Absolutely.
there. Citizenship is another one, British and Irish citizenship.
Yeah.
In a New Ireland that is not within the gift of a new Irish government to deliver British citizenship. And while we have it in the Good Friday Agreement, it has to be black and white.
Yeah.
That citizenship issues and cultural issues and so on and so forth will be held in our new Second Republic. And I think the only way to get around that is the codified Bill of Rights, which is an entirely other topic that I don't want to get into. But for those with those concerns, what better way is there to assure your identity, your cultural expression, than a recognized codified Bill of Rights that is built into the Constitution?
Yeah, with that purpose in mind. Yeah, that pension question is, I think, a very good example of where it's one thing to say, of course, I believe in self-determination and democracy and one person, one vote. And they say, well, who would be against that? Well, I might have a question if it turns out I lose 35 years of payments into my pension plan. That there are going to be some questions, and if there's not clarity around the answer, I'm not sure I'm ready to dive right in. So that's really the whole point of the push for the debate, of the push for why it is important for these questions to be asked clearly and to say, well, this is what we're going to do to be able to find answers to that. And thanks for personalizing that so clearly. It sounds as though, and like anybody else, we spend time with the folks we work with and love and our families. Your childhood and familial upbringing sounded, I would say, to have been far more firmly in what we might describe as a unionist community and a unionist environment than now, perhaps, right? Would that be fair to? Do you?
Yeah, I was raised in a loyalist and unionist community. Yeah. And a pro-union loyalist family, but that would not be my politics now. I would be far removed from it, and I'm not in a. I certainly don't speak for the unionist community or the loyalist community. I can only speak as an individual, and I'm one of one out of what almost 8 million perceptions on the
Yeah.
island of Ireland.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's but
Well, I
yeah,
just
but no, no.
wonder, like, it's not, so it's not, you're not going to the Orange Hall for meetings weekly or monthly. You're not spending time in that space, but but it is a familiarity that you have more so than folks on the call or myself, certainly. And I just wonder if there's something that you wish that, that they would know, that they would read or understand, or something along those lines, where they might say, if there's, as it comes to the question of Irish unity, boy, I wish we could spend time in this area. Is there something like that stands out?
Yeah, I mean, what I'll come at the question two ways.
Yeah.
From what I see and observe, unionism, and by that I mean political unionism, is
Hmm.
afraid to engage and debate. As we've briefly spoke about, the UK is failing the people of Northern Ireland and indeed elsewhere. Pre and post Brexit Britain is lost in a petty game of one-upmanship where
Yeah.
dangerous and venomous English nationalism reigns, and refugees are being made scapegoats to protect Westminster incompetence and
Yep.
guard an elitist establishment. The problems in our society here in Northern Ireland are a result of institutional sectarianism and an unjust economic system that's rigged in favour of the English super rich and the two-party state that's established across the water. So,
Yep.
let's think about it. Even if unionism had all 18 MP seats in Westminster, and of all 18 of those unionists were on the same page, how can they change one jot anything better for Northern Ireland? They
Yeah.
can't. And I feel many in unionism are beginning to know this.
Yeah.
So they're afraid to debate the real issues that matter. And so they dodge the live issues and they resort to symbolism, so the debate becomes about flags,
Yeah.
emblems, and the like. I have yet to meet a unionist politician wanting, for example, to address the root cause of the housing crisis. It always boils down to some symbolic trinket that adds zero in value to the working man or woman's wallet and purse.
Yeah.
And I just wish, that this demand by unionist politicians that the people of Northern Ireland must just accept more of less in this stale union. They create artificial conflicts and control through fear. It's almost as if authentic peace and reconciliation is a threat to them. So that's the first point that I'm
Yeah.
on it. But there's also then, what about Protestant history on this island? And I'm on about authentic, true Protestant history, not the stuff that the Orange Order propagates, although Orange culture has every right to be in this island, as
Yep.
does Irish republicanism. I mean, they were both created around the same time in the 1790s.
Yep.
But I would love for unionism to truly understand its history and then ask itself, what does it mean to be a unionist in 2025? What does it mean to be a loyalist in 2025? Is it blind faith in a seat of power that expects you to beg at its table? Is it
Yeah.
allegiance to people who exclude and ignore you? Is it
Yeah.
obedience to a crown and a government that increases suffering and hurts the working class, are disabled, and are sick? You know, for me, Brexit and it was the disaster of deceit by Carlingtons that woke me up and enabled me to cross the Rubicon.
Yeah.
But politics here needs to find real solutions, not scapegoats. And I wish Protestants could see that they have a huge opportunity to work and build a new Ireland that will include a new relationship with Britain, but it'll be based on our shared values and our mutual cooperation and our common interests.
Yeah.
I just wish unionism would bust myths,
Yeah.
rise above propaganda, escape the misinformation to see the credible evidence that exists to demonstrate that they will be better off and, more importantly, being valuable citizens in a new republic.
Yeah.
I just wish unionism understood that burying its head in the sand to avoid the reality of democracy via the required referendums, if we think of the Good Friday Agreement, is delusional in the strategic long term. And they've got to ask the question, and I mentioned it earlier, who is keeping them outraged and for why?
Yeah.
It's not. That's
Yeah,
my
no, I
view.
appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. I love that perspective there. There is always going to be, by necessity, a relationship between Ireland and Britain. So you can
Yeah.
choose to be a member of a republic that prioritizes your needs as much as everybody else's, as opposed to subservient, loyalty to a
Yeah.
symbolism that isn't serving. That is excellent perspective, and I'm grateful very much for sharing so passionately where this has to go. And
And it's
again,
a passionate
highlighting.
debate. It's always a
It is.
passionate debate
It
when you
is.
get
I mean,
going.
would you have? I really appreciated earlier on when you
What's not passionate about wanting to improve your quality of life and well-being?
right
I mean, I don't. I
for
mean,
you and for your neighbor. Exactly right. No,
yeah.
it's exactly it. Earlier on, you talked about the lack of nuance. Certainly, obviously, in a two-word slogan, spray painted Brits out lacks nuance. But that the emergence of a more textured and aware and rooted in equality, that Republican messaging has evolved over time. It's not
Yeah.
Brits out doesn't cover it. And when
No.
when a
No.
5-year-old sees
No.
a school bus petrol bombed and then Brits out, well, you don't have many questions. You just kind of want to get someplace safe and draw a line. If you had a similar opportunity to share thoughts to the more nationalist community, and a community seeking referendums in unity, or for the more Republican side. And I just before I go on, the Ghost Limb, that book, I for Claire.
By Claire Mitchell. Yeah.
Yeah, Claire
Excellent book.
Mitchell. Excellent
Excellent
book.
book.
I recommend to
Recommended
our
to anybody in the diaspora over in the States to read.
same.
Brilliant book.
I think it's hard to get over here, but we're looking to different ways, because it captures that question
I
that you
know a
just spoke of.
supply chain guru who knows a girl called Claire
Yes.
Mitchell could possibly get that sorted
Excellent.
for you.
Highly recommended that. But I wonder if there isn't a message, or a different idea for what do you think the nationalist community is missing? Why isn't that message getting out? Why isn't it that landing on the right ears the right way?
I think within both traditions on this island, there's a certain level of arrogance that prevails with some.
Hmm.
When they look down their noses. I remember one time standing with a former blanket man having a conversation about how I was an Irish Republican, and he was completely going, yeah, but it's not an Irish Republican. You're not a real Irish Republican, and I was just laughing at him. And, I'm going, well, I'm Irish. Do you accept that I'm Irish? Do you accept that I'm, so you had to peel it all down. So,
Yep.
so it's, I think there's that attitude. I mean, I have met people who, and I'm no longer on X or Twitter, but
Yeah.
if you go on to Twitter, I think you get an example of the toxicity that can take place around the debates. And I think when it gets into that stage, that it just switches people off. I really do think it switches people off. And I think that for those of us who are New Irelanders that desire to see authentic democratic accountability in this island, that we just got to keep a level head. As I said earlier about the facts and 50 idiots and one idiot, or 50 scholars and one idiot, this debate is attracting a lot of idiots, and we have to be very discerning of who are the time wasters and who are the genuine leaders that can either deliver their communities or not, and not waste time on the idiots, because on both sides of the camp there are idiots, and they damage both their causes irrevocably. And I just think, use discernment, stick to the facts and figures, and present it with a cool, level head.
Yeah.
There should be nobody, particularly with what's going on in England. If we look at Farage and Reform and that English nationalism that is prevalent and toxically destroying politics in Britain. Again, just scapegoating, and it's just, there's nobody working on the solutions. I think we here who want a new republic, who want accountable democracy, simply keep our eyes focused on that decent political objective and how we can secure it by peaceful means and by persuading others with the argument of our debate.
I think that's a really great charge to have folks be reminded of. That you don't have to do a whole lot when you're right. You don't have to do a whole lot. You got to keep it level-headed. You got to keep it very, very calm and open to folks to ask questions and recognize. And not everyone's going to agree, but that isn't a sign to get louder. It's a sign to listen a little more closely. And then, as we're wrapping up here, I know we just have a few more moments. We've, as I said at the top, this whole webinar, the time we have got to share with you today was born of the practice of we've been hosting people's assemblies, the Commission on the Future of Ireland People's Assemblies for Irish Unity for the diaspora, coast to coast. By the end of next month, I think we'll have hit 11 cities in America. Hundreds of people have attended, thousands of people registered and been a part of that conversation. A bonus of that is attendees are then asked to opt in, if they choose, to join a group of online activists who are making this work possible and to continue the conversation. And part of that conversation resulted in we need to learn more. There's a great desire for us to get to dig in and understand this a little bit better. And so out of that was born this webinar series. It means so much to me that you have taken the time out of your day, Glen, to spend time with us to help us learn more and to understand this. Is there anything that you would like? We don't certainly represent all of Irish America, but we are hitting cities coast to coast. What is it you think that you would love for Irish America working on this question to know, or is there any thoughts you'd like to share with that?
Well, given that we're all New Irelanders, the Irish diaspora across North America, both in the States and in Canada and further afield, Australia and so on and so forth, are going to be critical as this debate intensifies. And Irish America in the past have been sterling in their support for change. And as someone involved, even though I was on the side of unionism at that time and in the Good Friday Agreement, I would like to thank Irish America, because for me, the Good Friday Agreement would not have come about without the sterling leadership provided by Senator George Mitchell and without the influence of your president at that time, Bill Clinton. And that was obvious to all the parties participating in this talk. So in the talks at that time, so Irish American support is absolutely critical. And I, for one, thank you from the bottom of my soul for all that Irish America did at the time of the Good Friday Agreement, and actually more recently, the influences that were exerted from Irish America with Brexit. Because I think, when we were in that turmoil, when Johnson was the Prime Minister of the UK, I think things could have got a lot worse, but for the influences, the sterling steady, common sense influences coming from America that I know was being led by or being influenced by the diaspora out there. So my message is lawn may it continue. We are in a new continued phase. We are in that, we are in post-conflict resolution is complete almost. So we are entering that post-conflict transformational stage where we hope to deliver something that I believe no one on this island that is living has ever had. And that is a nation that we can genuinely and authentically call our own. I really, really mean that, because, I know people, I know everyone bangs on about Northern Ireland and partition in Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland, but people forget, and I have said this before, partition created two illegitimate states on this island. And, the constitution of the southern state is not the republic, so we all need to work towards achieving that second republic where all the people of this island, everyone, can have accountable government delivered in an equal and equitable way. And again, for me, it's about quality of life, it's about well-being. And I don't know anybody that could be against that. I don't know anybody that could be against that debate, even from a point of view of wanting to learn. And I think that as we move forward, that the diaspora in America will be critical. So please, please, please continue to lobby your senators, continue to lobby your congressmen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And please continue to have that constructive, positive influence, because Britain is not going to wake up one morning and say, you know what, we're going to have a referendum.
No,
These
sadly, no.
guys are only going to do this if they are, I don't want to use the word coerced, but cajoled is maybe a better word. You know, it is not, it's almost as if they have forgotten their declaration of no economic strategic interest in Northern Ireland. And I think we need to get back to that Britain needs to be reminded of its obligations that it committed to then, of its obligations under the Good Friday Agreement, where referendums are they're an exercise in democracy. They're an exercise in democracy. And for them not to happen is a denial of democracy. And I get the fear that's maybe associated with that. I mean, I'm talking about the fear of change. But I think Irish America will be critical in influencing the British government to get the referendum program and caveats sorted for us.
That's a very excellent note to leave it on, Glenn. I'm so grateful to you for saying yes every time asked. It really means a great deal to me personally, to the organization, to Irish America, that when there are opportunities to share your story and help us understand more clearly the work ahead, you show up and share generously and lovingly every time. I'm so grateful to it very much. And thank you additionally for your work with Veterans for Peace, your work in your chain supply to ensure human rights amongst all your suppliers around the world, and your work all over it for decades. It is an incredible model, and one that I hope we can live up to. And I'm so grateful to you for sharing with us so openly.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you. And thank you to everybody out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as Glenn mentioned, we'll be back here on September 20th with Colin Harvey, a law professor at Queen's University Belfast, to talk about some of the constitutional questions that we are now discussing as we move forward. And I'll have announcements about future calls. Once a month, we'll be doing these webinars. Thank you, Glenn, for being our first guest, for setting the bar very high. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate you taking the time to do this. We'll talk to you soon. Very well. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We'll have the recording up soon. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.